Rising labor costs, pandemic bottlenecks, and escalating US-China trade tensions recently forced multinational corporations to adopt a strategy known as China Plus One. This timeline tracks that shift. As US tariffs climbed between 2018 and 2026, foreign direct investment flooded into Southeast Asia and India to fund thousands of new factory openings outside of Chinese borders. The bottom half of this timeline shows a paradox. During this same period of diversification, China's manufacturing trade surplus surged from $1 trillion to $2 trillion. This $2 trillion surplus dwarfs the scale of the diversification efforts shown above. Economists identify this flood of outbound goods as China Shock 2.0. China currently produces roughly 29% of all global manufacturing. That volume equals the combined industrial output of the United States, Japan, and Germany. The global supply chain is undergoing a structural realignment. China has moved into the role of the factory for factories, the primary source of industrial inputs for the rest of the world. This map of China's Pearl River and Yangtze deltas illustrates the architecture of this dominance. It plots 50 specialized manufacturing belts. These industrial clusters physically concentrate raw material processors, component makers, and final assembly lines into tight geographic radii. This proximity shrinks the cost of moving materials and reduces product iteration cycles from weeks to hours. This infrastructure relies on China's 48,000-kilometer high-speed rail network, shown here with these modern bullet trains. While built for passengers, this rail system serves a specific industrial function, moving managers and small parcel components between factories and urban business centers in a few hours. This density creates a supply chain inside a factory effect. Matching this capacity requires constructing entire integrated industrial cities rather than individual assembly plants. This diagram shows the flying geese economic model. Historically, as a manufacturing nation's wages rise, it sheds labor-intensive tasks to poorer countries with cheaper labor. China circumvented this labor migration model through the automation paradox, using robotics to keep factories in place even as wages rose. Because China's localized component networks are so dense, the physical hardware needed to build robotic systems is significantly cheaper than in Western markets. This image shows highly precise robotic arms on a CNC machining line, a result of using cheap domestic hardware to replace manual labor. Automating routine tasks like welding and logistics allows Chinese manufacturers to maintain their grip on low-margin sectors despite rising costs. Retaining this baseline capacity provides the economies of scale required to expand into high-tech manufacturing, such as electric vehicles and advanced biotechnology. By subsidizing automation to retain the bottom of the value chain while climbing to the top, China has altered the traditional rules of macroeconomic development. Centralized macroeconomic planning drives this shift, specifically through initiatives like Made in China 2025 and the Dual Circulation Strategy. This document outlines the text of the dual circulation policy, which directs the state to achieve import substitution across the board. The intent is to secure total self-reliance while embedding Chinese inputs into global value chains as leverage. Government policy is aimed directly at stimulating production. Directing state resources toward production subsidies rather than domestic consumer demand creates severe industrial overcapacity. Output routinely exceeds what the local market can absorb. This flowchart tracks the resulting shift in China's export profile. In 1995, exports consisted mostly of final consumer goods. By 2026, the volume shifted toward intermediate components, machinery, and capital goods. The $2 trillion trade surplus is the intended outcome of a deliberate state strategy to dominate the upstream nodes of global supply networks. This map of East and Southeast Asia reveals that the China Plus One strategy has forged an integrated hub and node network. China functions as the primary hub for machinery and upstream components, while countries like India and Vietnam act as satellite nodes for final assembly. Raw materials and agricultural goods flow into the Chinese hub from these node countries. China processes these resources into complex intermediate goods and industrial machinery, which are then exported back to the nodes. The nodes use that Chinese machinery to assemble final products, which are then shipped across the Pacific to bypass direct tariffs on China. This Samsung facility in Vietnam is a final assembly node that depends on this regional flow of goods. a manufacturing plant in Southeast Asia that relies on imported Chinese industrial machinery and subcomponents, remains tethered to Beijing. Moving final assembly to India or Vietnam obscures the underlying dependency by pushing it one step further up the supply chain. This pyramid shows the global supply chain hierarchy, from raw materials at the base to final assembly at the peak. Western diversification and China Plus One strategies have focused almost exclusively on relocating the top layer, final assembly. The foundation underneath remains in place. China has consolidated the upstream inputs required to make the global economy function. Relocating an assembly line to Mexico or India provides little strategic resilience if the industrial robotics and subcomponents still originate in Chinese industrial belts. China has mutated its export profile to become the global factory for factories. True supply chain independence demands the multi-decade, capital-intensive rebuilding of upstream industrial clusters, a reality the global market has yet to reconcile.